So what makes successful implementation of automation technology in your production workflows?
So I guess there's kind of a two-prong approach to this. There is a pre-implementation that happens during the consideration phase of a creative automation platform. And then there's the post-implementation phase that we can talk about.
Absolutely. What I notice in consideration is that absolute stakeholder alignment and buy-in typically delivers best results. If we look at automation technology, it's typically cross-functional. Right? It touches all the way from IT to media to creative to marketing, C-level, perhaps. And I think it makes most successful implementation if those are all aligned, if they share the same vision on what the technology should do for them. And if they're fully aligned in that regard. It helps to clarify what this technology will do for them in the long run. It helps to communicate that vision and the ideas to a wider team. Typically, gives great alignment off the bat when looking at those changes that are typically a result of implementing new technologies.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you say that, because when you talk about vision, right, you think about like, oh, it's high level, like that's where the focus is. But actually, it's so important for that vision to trickle down, especially when change management is happening and implementation of a new software tool, and how that gets communicated as well. Because now if looking at the post process, when we're implementing clients, how a successful implementation happens is by assigning the right task force to them, making sure that you have the right team to enable this change management plan, and making sure that everyone is aware about this vision, because senior stakeholders can have this like really thought out and like chalked out and everything. But it's important for that to get communicated to each team member so that when they're implementing, it's like, okay, here's the bigger picture. Here's where I'm working on. So it's like that two-way communication street that needs to happen. But yeah, it's so important that you say this when you see this in the pre-implementation phase and during the consideration. How would you think is the best way to get that translated into like the team that actually implements it?
So if we speak about vision and implementing new technology, it might be even vision on two layers. So on one hand, it's about the vision. What are we trying to achieve with implementing this new technology? Where are we going as a company? And hopefully partially as a result of the implementation of new technology. But it's even before in the process of looking at, I'm browsing the market, I'm looking for a vendor that can potentially support me in my vision. It's always interesting to look at what's their vision. Where are they moving towards as a company? And if those two align, I think that's a perfect combination. Like we have the same dot on the horizon and therefore we grow in the same direction. And then indeed on the level deeper, how is this technology then helping me today? So it's great that we're aligned on the vision, but this is also aligned with how I view things today. Is it helping me to get better as a brand and the way I do marketing? Full alignment on that level should allow for communication, let's say to the different stakeholders, teams and stakeholders within those teams. Like this is what we're after. This is how it's going to impact and change, hopefully for the better, the workflows and the things we're doing. And this is how you can ultimately contribute and benefit from it altogether. I think that's crucial to have that clear communication, especially if you look at automation technology. And automation, indeed, it is also about eliminating manual repetitive tasks that maybe fill up agendas of people these days. It's also about providing them a view on how can we invest your time back? How can you be of even greater value to the company if we take away these monotonous tasks from your day-to-day? So it's about setting a clear vision and getting everyone along in that vision, and ultimately also giving them the comfort that they play a role in that new view on things or new processes that will be implemented.
Yeah, so when recently, we've clearly closed few deals and some of those, and we're running actively quite a lot of implementations right now. And what I'm seeing across different teams, within my team and different clients, is that once that communication is clear, the onboarding process, it's so much simpler because immediately, and let's be honest, right? Like immediately when a new software comes in place, everyone's like, oh, it's change. We're all humans of habit. So we're like, oh, I don't know. Do I want to move to this new platform? Do I not? Those kind of things. And that's when we get buy-in from senior stakeholders and they join the sessions and those kickoff meetings with the end users, and they join in as sponsors and as okay, yeah, this is a vision. This is the bigger picture. This is where we're going as an organization, where our industry is going. And this is how creative automation is going to help us. So like you mentioned, those repetitive tasks that team members need to do, those enders, it's showing them the value and bringing highlight to the value that this can bring by removing those monotonous tasks and being like, hey, if you save so much time from doing this, now you can spend that time on actual creative activities and decisions and designs that you actually want to be focusing on, rather than focusing on like, small template changes or like iterations, which can be automated. Then why not make your solution and your ways of working, evolve it more so that you can make it better? And also sharing with them, I think it's important to share with them that vision also, because then the end users understand what are they working towards, what is their why as to this, like another software coming on board, because that's what I've seen like the most amount of friction coming with clients and things. But once that's identified, it's such a smooth process. Everyone's on board. Everyone's like, with their pen and paper, and they're like, let's go, let's, implement this and let's train ourselves on this platform.
Yeah, so you could argue that it's vision and then also mapping of the organization and stakeholders that you need to get along in that vision ultimately.
Yeah.
I think this is even beyond internal teams. It's brand, it's marketing, creative, it is IT, but also it's partners, right? Especially if you look at some of the bigger brands, typically either fully or partially outsourcing some of their creative work to their hero agencies, creating the beautiful for them. It needs to plug in ultimately down the line, right? And we talk about how are assets transferred, how is it designed in the first place? What's the ideation goes in? That to set expectations for all and everyone. After. Also, for example, looking at IT, they're typically looking at how can we consolidate a stack, right? A tech stack to make everyone's life easier. And we're not typically not looking at disjointed technology or another solution. So if we implement something, how can we ensure that we set it at the core of everything we do? We implement it, functionally, technically, as a part of that wider chain, which I think typically also increases adoption significantly. And that makes sense, right? No one wants another tool, but everyone wants a solution that makes current things better. I think if we look at how we tackle that at Storytech, it's ultimately about providing a wide stack off the bat. So obviously we talk our content marketing platform, which has creative automation to it, which has workflow to it, which has asset management and brand portals to it. But it's also about the ability to plug it in or integrate it with other platforms. Right? This is about everything that I produce, it needs to flow to a particular output channel. But I want to ensure that along the way, I'm not losing any valuable metadata. I want to ensure that my naming conventions are aligned with the platform that I push my content towards. It is about what are the typical platforms that my creatives are using to create master creatives, right? Is that Figma, is that Photoshop? We need to be able to integrate, because otherwise you can adopt a new piece of technology and it might make the life of some of the people in an organization more efficient, but if it comes too big of a cost, it's a huge hurdle for adoption as well.
So Raj, here's a question. When you're in that consideration phase and you're in that process, how many times does this come up in a conversation when customers are asking about, or potential clients are asking about, like, hey, what is your integrations like? What are your output channels like? Like, is this a massive topic of discussion during the consideration phase?
It depends, in all fairness. Sometimes we need to remind it, because obviously we want to set everyone up for success, right? Sometimes a request can be coming out of full pressure on a small team, or one particular team, not necessarily cross-organizational. And it's like, hey, we have a problem and we want to get it fixed. Something you can facilitate off the bat, right? Okay, come to us. We'll start helping you out with that very first pressing problem. But if you really want to benefit from it in all the breadth and width that is possible with the automation technology that we discussed, then you ultimately need to take a step back at some point. And sometimes you can already do it in the consideration phase. For example, we see that if a process is run through an RFP, for example, then typically there's a consultation of different teams. What is your view on it? And we kind of consolidate it. If this challenge or need arises from a single team or maybe a smaller part of an organization, then yes, it's something that you can probably fix in the short term, but you shouldn't forget to also still map the stakeholders, think about the breadth of what this could solve, how it aligns with the other technologies. So you can maybe sometimes reorder a bit the steps of a process ultimately, But in an ideal scenario, you always ensure that you touch on all and everything.
That's so interesting, because when you have these conversations beforehand during the consideration phase, like you're talking about all different permutations and combinations, how does the technology work, how are different output channels. And once they sign with us and then they continue with their implementation with my team, it's mainly focused on, like, then we become those kind of consultants. And that's what we like as well. It's like, okay, we understand your workflow entirely. We understand how things work, like which team, who is involved where, who's seeing the value of the platform, and then advising them to sort of say like, hey, it makes sense to have this integration. It makes sense to go in this direction. And also taking industry practices as well as to where other organizations in this industry are doing it, how they're doing it. And then, giving some sort of guidance, which I think a lot of clients value as well, because sometimes you have so much noise, it's crucial to just segregate that noise and be like, okay, what is applicable to my team? What is applicable to my company and my industry? And how can I go forward but still be market leaders in this industry? So it's interesting how these conversations change along the process when they become a client with Storytech, I would say.
So we've obviously now discussed kind of what makes successful implementation. Well, there's also the other side to it, if you will. What would you consider kind of the biggest challenges of implementing automation technology in production work?
I would definitely say if a dedicated team isn't assigned to it, if there's not a specific task force that's assigned. So if, there's a lot of times when we've seen people say, okay, let's get this new tool on board, but there's not really an execution plan. So you can have a vision. However, like an execution plan isn't there, then it can fall flat. And it is like, in the industry, if you look at it right now, a lot of digital transformations fail due to poor implementation or not having the right task force, not having the right people behind it. So that would be like the first thing that you identify. And another thing would be if you don't identify your KPIs and your objectives, because then what are you working towards? I can say like, oh yeah, I want to save time. But if you actually have some metrics to it, it would be good, because then you actually know the direction that you're working on, and it's like SMART goals. It's like you have something that's measurable and it's specific and it's attainable. And then you set these goals. And then as soon as you've achieved that first one, it's like, okay, I can now think about the next one. And that's how like Storytech and the client grows together, and you're on this journey together. It's not like you implement a technology and you're like, okay, thank you, bye. You sort yourself out. But it's like, let's do this together. Let's do this transformation together, where we're able to change your ways of working and actually do something that's bringing a return on investment for our clients. Because that makes us the most happy, right? It's not just about bringing them in, but it's actually them seeing the value.
Absolutely.
Would you add like anything else to what you have seen in your experience with Storytech as well?
I think kind of in an ideal scenario, you're all lined off the bat. You have a very clear idea and understanding of the challenges and what you want to solve and what the direction is. Well, let's be clear, that's probably an ideal scenario. But I think there's definitely also other ways to get there. So sometimes, like, if you look at bigger organizations, there's different markets, there's different regions, there's different teams. Sometimes they're organized by output channel, with a social team, a programmatic team, etc. And although in an ideal scenario, maybe to after that say, hey, we change as a group and we're going to implement that change, I definitely also see successful implementations where you can start a bit smaller. Say, hey, this is one team. It is in a controllable environment. We change the way we work. And then if indeed that lives up to the expectations, this is about, hey, how can we expand this? Because ultimately it becomes more efficient. There's that one happy social team in the back, they're all leaving at 4 in the afternoon, enjoying the sun. But jokes aside, they kind of see it. And it's also about, and I think that's a beautiful thing to witness, that it's about showing successes also internally, right? It's about video case studies, maybe internally. Hey, this is what we've done. This was the pain that we were in. And it's also like in the nature of people to then make sure that their colleagues can benefit from it as well. And then you can kind of, go from there. So, that's
actually good that you mentioned that, because I'm just thinking of it. And we have some clients who started just with one brand, and like one team started using us, and it started with a small scope. But then as we grew and as that became a success story, we went one to the next, a new brand, a new brand, a new brand. So that's how they expanded their ways of working and their use of creative automation and how they scale content production. And then they were able to refer each other, because it's nice when you get that internal reference, the trust is there more and you're seeing the success of it. But I think what is really good for everyone to also know is you don't have to start like big, like go big or go home. You can start with the control scope, see how it goes, and then expand more. And then you're able to see success faster, right?
Absolutely. And I think it is also a good thing to consider when you're adopting a solution. If you're in a team, you have particular problems, you're looking for a technology solution that can help you overcome those. Be nice to your colleagues and think about what is the full breadth of capabilities that this vendor has, right? A, what we discussed earlier, how does it align on the vision? Because then at least you can almost expect that the roadmap, the features, the future features are also in a direction that you can benefit from it as an organization. But besides that, it's also what's the breadth, right? So for Storytech, we look at content automation. We're not purely on HTML. We're not purely on static. It's a combination of all of those, right? We need to be able to do video and out of home and linear TV. And then there's programmatic HTML. And it's super important because if you would adopt a solution that can only do one or two of them, then that growth makes it very difficult, right? So then you maybe have a short-term answer to it. But then the moment you say, okay, this is the new way of working, want to implement it wider, we're going to run into limitations. So we're back to square ultimately. Again, change, again, searching for that vendor with a vision match and the capability. So it's also about finding a solution for yourself that is future-proof, that in some cases might be even more feature rich than you immediately need. But yeah, you're also in a continuous change as an organization. You know, your preferences and needs also evolve over time. I think that's strong. Also looking at the wider Storytech stack, the content marketing platform as a wider solution even than purely content automation. It gives room for growth, right? I might not be in a need for digital asset management on a portal right now, but I'm in desperate need to automate my production. But then what's next? So yeah, searching for a vendor that allows you to scale and grow with you, I think is also, crucial piece.
Yeah, because you had touched upon this earlier where you're talking about like so many, like having such a varied tech stack and then, excuse me, and then having an option of, okay, you start with creative automation or content production and then scaling up and then thinking about how you can get all those solutions with one vendor, just making your tech stacks tool also just inlined and clear.
It's not easy to buy tech these days, I would say. Yeah, I think also looking for a partner that can support you there is definitely a bit of an advice.
Yeah. What would you say is like the barriers of entry to implementing like a technology solution like Storytech?
I mean, nothing new probably, but there's always a lack of resources, a lack of budget, right? But the interesting thing is that it's also about creating sometimes you're so swamped and you're so busy, you're maybe spending all your budgets in old-fashioned manners that kind of also keeps you away from investing it or researching things, how it can be done better or more efficient end of day. So it's also about breaking through that to an extent. But again, that comes back to convincing and getting the buy-in early days. So it feeds back to the vision. Are we aligned that the market is changing, that we can't keep doing things the way we're currently doing them, and do we all agree that this will break at some point? And ideally, before shit hits the van, you come to that realization, right? Because otherwise you're in deeper trouble. But it's never too late. You can always look at what's the situation we're in, how can we gradually make it better? Yeah, that broader buy-in, I think, is important to have that off the bat.
Yeah. I wanna double click on the first comment that you had made, which was budget, right? Like I hear it a lot from my existing clients. I'm sure you also hear it a lot. Is budget is always such a big issue, and sometimes it's like for me, I'm just like, yeah, but if you look at the bigger picture, we're scaling content, cost is coming down. I think it's so important to share with clients, and we have to iterate this so many times in so many different like conversations on how, yes, budget is an issue. And I understand that spending on a new tech stack or new tech tool is an issue. However, if you're looking at return on investment, if you're looking at how you want to scale production and remove people's time working on like mundane tasks and like put them on like actual tasks that they should be focused on with their role. It's so crucial to highlight that constantly, that right now, spend the money. However, it does bring in a lot more return on investment later on when you're looking at iterating, making those versionings, languages across globally, scaling that content. Yeah,
Absolutely. I think more so if you look at like the creative space, historically, there hasn't been large technology budgets necessarily, right? It's very much a human resource driven game. So it's not always that like at the beginning of year when we're making our budgets, we're reserving an X amount, for technology particularly. But it is spent easily on retainers here and there or, internal or external teams, etc. So it's also a bit about a mind shift. How are we spending our budgets and how do we make sure that we get the most ROI ultimately, if any, we invest? At the same time, the cross-functional piece that we discussed might also trigger a bit of that budget conversation. So bluntly, if we look at typically creative teams are delivering upon request of marketing and brand teams, and they're the ones requesting. But also they feel the pain typically when they can't request what they need in order to fuel their campaigns and get their results in the fast-changing ad landscape. So is this really only a creative problem or is it also a marketing problem? And where does that leave you in terms of your budgets as well? So this is very much, sometimes some of these benefits are almost hidden benefits, right? So what does it mean if a creative team says no to a creative request? Well, end of the day, they don't deliver it. But what is the actual impact on marketing, on campaigning, on media? What does that mean for my campaign performance? Sometimes hard to make very tangible, but definitely something to take into account. So yeah, sometimes experience a bit of an attitude like this is what we can do, right? And at some point, we've worked our extra hours, but what is the true impact on the business? And if we have the ability to make that visible, that can potentially also unlock internal conversations around budget. Hey, we need to invest in this because this is going to help us grow our brand moving forward.
I think what you said there is unlocking budget from different teams is such a, like, if I could highlight it, I would highlight it, because it's also so important to see how teams communicate with each other. Like, there's so much value that multiple teams can get from a platform like Storytech. It's okay, you can and I've seen this where we've had interactions with clients and we're kind of consulting them on how they can split the budget, because one team is using it this way, another team is using it another way, and another team is using it another way. And it's like, okay, you can split the budget across this is how you split it. And giving those ideas, because sometimes they don't talk internally, but when we work with so many different clients, we see, okay, sometimes it's siloed conversations, and we're able to give that, I don't know, I like those thought-provoking questions and be like, hey, what about, this way of calculating budget, or what about this way? And then immediately I've seen so many clients come back and be like, oh, okay, well, now I have budget now. Okay, this is how we're going to do it. And it's like a light bulb moment.
Absolutely. And in defense of the big global brands, right? It's not easy. There's regional offices, there's global offices, there's local markets, there's the different channels. So it becomes complex quite soon, and it's quite hard to keep track on what's happening where, who's responsible for what, who's helping us, where our resources spend. Which actually I think is an interesting thing, because one of the upsides of having more teams working in one platform is that it gives you a lot of control.
Yes.
Content automation, you can exactly see who's producing content, where is it flowing, to which channels is it pushed, what are my underused assets. That is a huge benefit if you want to get to tangible results. Like, hey, what are we doing here? Where are these beautiful ads that my hero content that I produced and put a lot of hard work and thinking and money in? How is that actually being leveraged across? And is it effective? And where is it used? And that gives so much back and gives so much control and visibility over processes, which then moving forward will also make it easier to make informed decisions on resources in general.
Yeah, you're completely right. How have you seen organizations who work in a decentralized workflow compared to a centralized workflow, and how their ways of working and their implementation? Even I have some thoughts on this, but yeah, let's start with maybe pre-implementation.
Yeah. So if we I mean, if you look at content automation, it's ultimately it's often about haloing hero content, as we like to refer to it. So it's basically making all your adapts, versions, and channel-specific content based on that one hero concept. And broadly speaking, you could identify two ways of working. Either it's a very centralized operation where there's one central team, they're in charge of the hero creative. They get their briefs, for example, from markets or teams. On behalf of those, they basically create everything, which is then shared, either through central campaign distribution or via DAM brand portals to markets they execute locally. More of a decentralized approach is, let's say, without technology, would come closest to a workflow where open files are being created. Guidelines on how to localize such file are being created, and those are shared. And there's a lot of work happening then in the market. So, for example, local markets tend to have an agency or in-house creative resources where they receive open files and then read through the guidelines and make their adapts for the market, which obviously houses brand consistency issues, but that's for a later chat. So if we look at those two, technical capabilities of an automation platform basically allow for two ways of working. And even though some organizations might work in a more centralized manner because they want to control the resources that are working on adaptation, now through the use of the technology, they can actually invite, for example, markets to jump on, create your own content. There's no need for a brief anymore at this point because it's so easy to produce content in a decentralized manner. Now, in light of implementation, that might be too much change at a time. So you could look at it like, hey, although now from a technology perspective, we have the ability to start working in a slightly different manner, it might still be the best way to actually say, well, let's first make sure that in this controlled environment, we still take the briefs, nothing changes. There's a faster and cheaper delivery towards the market. But that's like phase one, 3-6 months or whatever. That's how we run. And then maybe we start onboarding a couple of markets that are open to innovation, or that maybe have been knocking on your door. Can we get our hands on the files, etc., for a longer time? That makes a very logical, natural first group to actually open it up. And then you go from there. So in some cases, about we completely off the bat want to change everything we do. And that's a way of doing it. But maybe in large organizations or in organizations that maybe naturally have a bit of a harder time changing in general, it might be good to say, okay, how can we initially do it better what we're already doing and then implement change in the different phases? Is that also something that you experience from an implementation perspective? Or?
Yeah, definitely, because we have clients who come in and with a centralized model and they want to go decentralized, or they start decentralized and they want to go centralized. But ultimately, they're all there with the same goal, right? Which is having those brand guidelines and having oversight as to what each market is doing and having some sort of just overview, I would say, and control over it. Because a lot of clients, if they come with a decentralized flow, they don't have control as to what local markets are doing. Suddenly things are flying out and it's like, content's going all over the place. And that kind of I feel like the biggest thing that people are looking for is that control over the situation. But yeah, even we recommend, that's why as soon as you onboard with Storytech, we first do a workflow analysis, what is your ways of working? What is your current workflow? How do you function? And then we see, okay, where does Storytech fit within that process? Where can we bring better efficiencies? And where can we actually guide you in a certain way where your experience with technology and what you're trying to achieve from the technology can actually be achieved? Because if you go 0 to 100, then it's either going to go complete disaster or it's going to go good. But there is a likelihood that it might go a disaster. So how do we prevent that from happening? Also having those conversations with the client, right? Telling them hey, I understand you're working in a centralized workflow or decentralized and you want to move to a centralized. Great. We will guide you on what that timeline also needs to be. Let's take this, let's chew. What is the saying in English? Chew what you can bite off what you can chew.
Yep.
Something
like that.
Okay. Yeah. So it's take one step at a time towards that bigger goal of going from a decentralized model to a centralized model, and then slowly but surely seeing progress and seeing how you're able to have those brand guidelines, you're able to scale content, you're able to give access to local markets, but also having control over it. So that's something that I've definitely seen in the past with clients so far. And it's been a successful process, I would say.
And the sun started shining. So can I thank you for this conversation today, Deepa?
Yeah, thank you so much, Raj. This was a lovely conversation.
Implement
Right on it.